your role is really what people call the ombudsperson. And people would say, in a situation where it seems in the indices that track corruption, we are going in the wrong direction, now this would be the time for you to kick in. Explain your role a little bit and how it's backed by statute in South Africa.
Okay, thanks, Thulas. I think to say we're an ombudsperson is pretty conservative in light of what the courts themselves have said in South Africa. You recall there's a Mail and Guardian case which said this is an institution that goes way beyond the usual ombudsman function. It's also an anti-corruption directorate. It's an investigation body. So I think when we compare ourselves to other bodies internationally, the legislation, Public Protector Act, and of course the Section 181 and 182 of the Constitution go much further. So there's a mandate there upon receipt of a complaint or upon one's own initiative to investigate, to report and take remedial action. And of course, you will know that the court, especially the Constitutional Court, has taken it further in the Nkandla case to say this is binding. So it's a much bigger institution comparatively internationally. And there's been a lot of power, but of course, the one thing that we can't do is prosecute, which we'd love to do.
Much bigger institution in as far as the mandate is concerned, and in fact you just explained the powers, but do you have the resources? Because I seem to recall that each year you go back to Parliament and that is your cry. And what does that say about the political will to support your institution to nip corruption in the bud?
It's good you're raising political will, because when I took our team to Singapore about 3 years ago, they kept on talking about political will. The Singaporeans are the leaders in this thing. So you're right. The President Ramaphosa, has been saying the correct things. And in the past, I think I've been frustrated. I won't lie to you. I've been quite frustrated by the political will. So I think this is a step in the right direction. Definitely resources and funds have been a problem. There have been many investigations that have, I'd like to say, expired. I'll give you one which I was an integral part of, the Mandela funeral, for example. You only got it last year, but this started in just after Mandela passed away. So, and by the time you release this thing, it's a bit stale. And the people have spent the money. Some of them are no longer in the positions that they're supposed to, that they were being investigated in. And of course, I always feel that it steals the thunder from an investigation when someone is no longer in the position concerned. So you're absolutely right. I think resources would certainly help, but certainly political will and politicians and officials walking the talk. Because remember, this is in many instances where government has been embarrassed in South Africa, it has largely been about public procurement, public procurement going wrong, whether it's people doing the wrong thing deliberately or negligently, but public procurement has certainly embarrassed. I mean, starting with Nkandla, starting with
sure.
a whole range of others.
What does your caseload look like? I mean, I can tell you from my experience as a journalist, where people believe that you can certainly do something about their plight and the issues that they believe deserve to come into the public spotlight. The caseload and the number of issues reported to me, I can only imagine yours.
Yes, look, it's very high. The current one, I can't give you the current stats for this particular month, but at the height of the numbers, there were about 40,000. You know, when people, what we used to call Gogo Dlamini, because you see, there are the high-profile matters that that you as journalists love and talk about a lot.
Yes.
But there is that everyday problem. The person who's complaining about their pension falling short, and of course that's the largest volume. Probably 90% are those bread and butter sort of issues. But bread and butter, corruption also affects the delivery of services. Corruption also eats into the quality of life. You've got alleged theft from hospitals. I've dealt with an alleged interference with the wine contract on the SAA flights, for example. That's a public entity. It's a whole range of issues. But what obviously happens is that it eats into the money that is meant for service delivery.
So interesting that you should give that example of the wine contract for the SAA flights. I mean, it then brings the specter of it takes two to tango. I imagine that in that particular instance, it's one of those instances where one of the players is a private sector player.
It's always a private sector.
Your mandate only extends as far as the public sector is concerned, doesn't it?
Yes, it's about.
So what do you do then?
Yeah, so it has tied our hands, which is why it's important to have an integrity framework and a justice system that works, prosecutorial system that works. SAPS must work effectively. The National Prosecuting Authority is at the apex of this. They've got to be able to have an effective asset forfeiture mechanism. They've got to be able to prosecute these things and investigate them properly, the hawks. But people are seeing that these things are starting to work. The public protector, I think people were very excited because there was a lot of limelight surrounding a lot of the cases. But it's not the only entity. It has to be a partnership. It can't work on its own.
You're saying people are seeing that these things are starting to work, these institutions that you just mentioned. I'm reading there that at some point, you yourselves as the public protector were not entirely happy with some of these institutions, how they come to...
I'll speak about myself. I don't want to bind... This is a very subjective opinion, but obviously I'm speaking on behalf of the office. But, you know, you find you do an investigation, you know, where there's tender, a very dirty tender. You can see that there's funny mischief here. But even if you were to share this information going ahead, you wouldn't be guaranteed that much would happen after that. And it's almost like a relay. That's the analogy that I like to use, that you will pass the baton after our investigation. Someone has to run with that. So in future, it can only work if all these institutions are working properly, especially the NPA, especially prosecutions. Remember, they have a lot of power. They've got power to issue preservation orders, to freeze assets. A lot of the corruption that is going on continues to go on because people keep the proceeds, the illegal, illicit proceeds of corruption. If you want this thing to work, you put people in jail, you take away the ill-gotten goods and the ill-gotten proceeds. Now, there's a place called Tender Park. I'm sure you...
In Limpopo?
Yes. That place is still flourishing. And a lot of those people, if the system worked, would not be having some of the properties that they're on. If the system worked and was biting properly. Remember, that province was almost at its knees and was put under administration because of maladministration. We have a very specific mandate about maladministration.
Kevin Malunga, let's talk, you're talking here about the caseload in as far as what you previously called the Gogo Dlamini cases, but it's really the bread and butter issues that people raise from various communities. How difficult then does this make your job that a large number of cases as well that you have to attend to and that tend to take up a lot of attention have to do with the Executive Ethics Code? In simple terms, would your job be a much easier job if everyone in the executive did what they were supposed to do?
Oh, absolutely. That would mean the focus would be on helping people with their day-to-day needs, their pensions and the roads, and people complain about, as I said, literally real bread and butter issues. So the Executive Ethics Act infringements are very involved. And remember, this is an evidence-based institution. You have to, you have to discover documents. It's a to and fro, and eventually come up with and the team is actually quite small that does that particular. But they've been quite successful. Recently, they came up with the Lynn Brown report. They also came up with the Des Van Rooyen report, and the president, based on those reports, dismissed those 2 ministers. He's actually put it in writing. So it's quite edifying and gratifying when especially for that team, when there are outcomes that actually work.
And again, I'm sensing that it's almost impossible to not compare with the previous administration. What was your experience as an office? I mean, we all focus on the Nkandla case, the Nkandla matter that you investigated, but there were countless other investigations that had to do with people just below former President Jacob Zuma in the executive. What was the experience when people were supposed to face consequences?
Look, I think a lot of that stuff is disappointing. I'll give you the Mandela funeral one because I was an integral part of that one, and it's actually unconscionable where people are burying the icon of the nation, right? Nelson Mandela, and people there's a lot of mourning and so forth. In the background, people are just busy giving themselves contracts, signing things, inflating prices. So what it means is that a country's value system is at risk or is damaged. And I think that's where probably the new government probably needs to think about it, to say, look, how do we have this situation where people don't even feel anything when they loot the public purse? Because it's so rampant. I mean, I've done unannounced visits if I go to the grassroots, where you go to a testing station, you do an unannounced visit at a testing station, and a guy who says he's a runner is offering all sorts of things for bribes. It's so blatant and so brazen. It's almost a well-known thing that there's a certain amount that is required for a driver's license all over the country. And no one is doing anything about that. There's so many of these. So the psyche, if you are going to say you are going to pay for your child's driver's license, but you are complaining about politicians, you are also complicit.
So let me ask you a cheeky question, and I'm sure I can do this because you're a man of the law. I'm pretty sure you'll know how to navigate around it. There's been a lot of focus on your office since Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane took over. You've been Deputy Public Protector since the previous Public Protector was in place.
Yes.
I'm not going to ask you to comment about your boss, but I am going to ask you about the scrutiny that you've been under. How intense is it, and do you feel that in some of the work you have done, you've covered yourselves in glory?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as I said, I don't want to speak about things that are sub judice, that are all the noise. Look, from day one, when I started this particular role in December 2012, there was always theater and drama and lights and action. So this doesn't really surprise me. It's always been like this as far as long as I've been in the institution. There's always been.
In fact, your previous boss was at some point almost in a hostile relationship with the legislature, parliament.
Yes. So as I said, I think it's not new, and I think it's all these institutions are in flux. There's the work continues. That's one thing I'll tell you. The work continues. Remember, it's a very large team across the country. It's not just this one thing that people are reporting about Friday or whatever. Of course, it would help if some of the headlines weren't there, but there's a lot of work going on over and above.
But yes. Very quickly, what is your personal observation then of the perhaps shift in focus, let's call it that, because, obviously these two leaders will have different.
Look, I think as far as leadership, I think I'll let the leaders speak for themselves. But what I can confirm is that the work continues. Especially validating people's dignity and ensuring that. And I think I'm certainly re-energized by the new government's approach towards this, because there was a lot of, if I want to put it as own goals scored by the previous administration, where you defend the indefensible, where you do things, for lack of a better word, that are just plain stupid, And then you use the law, you waste taxpayers' money by hiring lawyers and so forth. So I think my advice to the new administration, and I'm done with this end of next year, is really that, you know, you've got to be very sincere and authentic and understand what corruption can do to services and legitimacy. I'll tell you a very interesting anecdote about some of the municipalities that one would subpoena and call in. Tshwane, Johannesburg, Nelson Mandela. A lot of them, you got a sense that there was, at the time, you got a sense that there was arrogance of power. And what did voters do? The voters voted with their feet. So there's a relationship between perceptions around corruption, perceptions around how you deal with service delivery and so forth, with political outcomes.
Sure.
It's very intertwined and very interlinked.
Advocate Kevin Malunga,
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Fascinating insights there about the workings of the public protector.